The Chicago Bears will have to make some tough decisions in free agency, including letting some of their young ascending free agents sign elsewhere.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. On the show today, we're going to go through the upcoming Chicago Bears free agents that they should let walk, that they shouldn't prioritize re-signing, and that if these guys can go get bigger contracts to play for someone else, more power to them. I think there's a few players that just the price likely won't match up with where the Bears are and what they need and where they need to invest their money, including a couple of bigger named and younger defensive backs who could cash in on the market this offseason. Plus, I think there's a handful of players who were just on the Bears for one season or even less than a season, and we saw it for a year and said, you know what, probably good with that. Don't need to run it back for a second year. They did their one and done, and now maybe ready to move on and get someone else in there, as well as another group of players who have been here for a couple of years and you're appreciative of what they gave you over time, but also maybe just ready for something new, some fresh blood in a couple other key spots on the roster. So this comes after on yesterday's podcast, we talked about all the players that the Bears should focus on re-signing and make the priority. Now we're looking at the other side as far as letting guys go. I do want to thank you for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA futures bet and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And I think the big names that we're going to hear a lot about for the Chicago Bears entering free agency are both Nahshon Wright and Jaquan Brisker as the two guys who have the best chance to cash in on a big deal this offseason as young players hitting free agency again. And I think both are names that, sure, I would take back if they came back cheap for whatever reason, but feel to me like players who are going to price themselves out of a range that would be worth it for the Bears to pay them. So a hometown discount aside, Nahshon Wright is likely going to get a big deal. Jaquan Brisker likely going to get big deals. And I don't think either one of them is worth the Chicago Bears currently making that kind of long-term investment in them at the going free agent market rate that they are expected to get. It's almost shocking the way that Nahshon Wright has emerged as a cornerback who's likely going to get a pretty decent payday this offseason, given where he's coming from. Now, it could be quite a wide range of things. If you look at various contract projections, he could get as much as, I've seen numbers as high as $15 million a year or numbers as low as $7 million a year. But either end of that spectrum, I'm not sure this is the player I want to invest a significant multi-year contract with big guaranteed money in it for multiple reasons. One, he has only done this for one season. Had all the turnovers this season, and it was fun to watch, and the emergence was a welcomed addition to the Bears secondary. That was a fun story this season, but we've only seen him do it for 1 year. He's not exactly proven as a guy that you can for sure count on playing on this level every single year. Like sometimes guys catch fire and everything lines up, and then the next year, teams have now watched his tape, have ways to kind of counteract him, and he struggles to maintain that level of play. The other thing is that I'm not fully convinced Nahshon Wright's level of play was something that is dominant and worthy of a significant contract, long-term type of lock him up deal. Had a bunch of great turnovers, and those were spectacular, skilled plays that he definitely deserves full credit for and deserves a significant pay raise because of his ability to generate those plays. But for all of the interceptions and forced fumbles he made that were great, there were plenty of below average to negative plays where he's beaten in coverage downfield for big gains, where he gave up a number of touchdowns in one-on-one coverage against receivers, and it was a lot of boom or bust. He giveth and taketh away, and there is an inconsistency there that I personally don't want to lock myself into long term, because rarely do you see a cornerback or really any individual defensive player like consistently rack up the extremely high-end turnover numbers. Like, sure, you'll see guys who get 2 to 4 every season. Like that you can do every year, but rarely, if ever, do you see a guy get, the 5 interceptions and what did he have in forced fumbles? 2 forced fumbles this season that Wright had, and then follow it up with 5 more interceptions and then 5 more. It's unlikely that you're going to get that extreme high volume of turnovers every single season from Nahshon Wright. And so if the turnovers come down, then I need the bad plays and the mistake plays to come down as well. And I'm not so convinced that that's going to happen all of a sudden either. And that's where then it becomes, again, like hard to want to invest heavily in that player in particular being the one that my long-term money will be tied up in at the cornerback position. And so it's not to say that he's a bad player or that he wouldn't be worth bringing back, but it becomes all about that price. And as soon as there's one team that sees 5 interceptions and says, boom, we need that guy in our secondary, let's pay him X, Y, or Z amount, good for him. He earned it. Go sign that deal, and we wish you the best of luck on your next team. Different reasoning, but same idea for Jaquan Brisker, where it's like, again, if you could get him back on a hometown discount type of he wants to be here, so he'll take a little less money than whatever the market might produce for him, we can start to have this conversation. But I have enough doubts and hesitancies and maybe fears about Jaquan Brisker as well for different reasons to not want to be locked into him for, the super long-term guaranteed money type of contract. He too has, a bit of a range. Salary contract projections are always a bit of a fickle game, in that you can look at one site's number and see something drastically different on another site, and we can't put too much stock into any one individual area. But this is a guy who could get anywhere from, on the low end, $8-9 million up to, $14-15 million. You look at like the going rates for safeties, it's kind of, the upper end guys are already pushing and above $20 million. He's not going to quite get there, but like $15 million is where guys like Cam Bynum, Javon Holland, Damani Hooker are. Hufanga from the 49ers went to the Broncos, got 13. Like, you could easily see Jaquan Brisker in that range, and I'm not willing to commit that kind of money to the player who we have now seen healthy for one season, which is great and good for him, and we're rooting for Jaquan Brisker's health for sure, but like the previous 3 years in a row all included concussions, and concussions significantly derailed his 2024 season. And along the way, Brisker has been a very good safety, but I don't think he's been, like the truly dominant dynamic safety. Like, he's still, I think he's gotten better, but he was missing some tackles earlier in his career. Maybe he's rounded that out a little bit. Still not great in coverage at times. He'll jump out, or he'll just be off, or the instincts won't quite be there. Like, he's not bad, but when we're nitpicking, do we give this guy a big contract over a long period of time with guaranteed monies? I combine he's pretty good, but hasn't been like truly dominantly special. And you have injury, concussion, question marks just about his long-term health, that any of the next concussions, how long may it knock him out for? Like consecutive concussions over time, even with a year off of being healthy, concussion-wise, like you can still, like the damage can still be worse and worse. I mean, we don't know his individual health situation, and you can't predict any individual concussion, but boy, there's just still one season does not eliminate durability question marks there that aren't his fault, but are my reality if I'm trying to make the best decisions for my team. Like, he's a valuable player, and if you could have him at a good low price, sure. I'm just not sure that, a 26-year-old safety like him, or I think Nahshon Wright also is about 26. Like, those are the guys who tend to get paid in free agency and tend to get maybe a little more than you expect. And it's the older guys who tend to get a little less than you might expect. And so I think both of them will end up being able to get contracts that are more than I think it would be worth the Chicago Bears paying to retain them. They're kind of at the high end of the spectrum here. There's some other players that the Bears should let walk because, okay, we brought them in, saw what they could do, and said, all right, I think we've seen enough and don't need to see anymore. So we'll go through a couple names that had their 1 year in Chicago, and I think that's enough. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or the guesswork. So instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online, and they'll handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. It's a huge time saver and gives some real peace of mind knowing that an expert is the one handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year. Just make sure to file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. I do want to thank you again for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. We really appreciate every single day you tune in, whether it's your first time or your 100th time tuning into the podcast. If you want to take your listening to the next level, you can check out the Locked On Bears Everydayers Club to get access to an ad-free audio feed of Locked On Bears that's compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Plus, you'll get access to an exclusive Locked On Bears listeners group chat in the Locked On Everydayers Club Discord server just for listeners of this show. If you want to check it out, head on over to lockedonbears.supercast to find out more. But so we know Jaquan Brisker and Nahshon Wright are kind of the two big young Bears free agents that are most likely to get the big contracts and maybe cost more than the Bears want to keep around. But I think there's other players that, yeah, you could certainly easily afford to bring them back. I just don't think you would want to. And even some guys that were new this season, and I think we saw enough pretty quickly. Like, I think the name that jumps to the top of the list here for me is wide receiver Olamide Zaccheaus, someone who emerged early in the offseason as an early favorite target of Caleb Williams, someone who built some quick chemistry for him. And we saw that early in the season as well, someone he was comfortable going to. But over the course of the year, we saw the effectiveness of that wane and be smaller and smaller to where, like, yes, he would catch the ball. He just wasn't doing much with it. He would catch it short, wasn't getting a lot of yards after catch, wasn't really making guys miss, and wasn't even creating a ton of separation. And in a lot of the wide receiver measurements, Zaccheaus was largely unimpressive despite some of the volume that he was receiving. And fortunately, Luther Burden gets up to speed and slowly takes more and more of Zaccheaus' role away from the offense. And you don't start to notice it much by the end of the season. But it was a one-year deal. It was worth bringing him in. It was good to have a veteran in there, especially in that slot position that can be important in Ben Johnson's offense. And I think all things considered, like, the Bears got their money's worth, even if it wasn't great and we didn't exactly love it. We cost them $1.5 million this season. But, like, I also feel like I've seen enough. And that's almost independent of how well Luther Burden emerged. Like, of course, it's much easier to say, no, thank you, Olamide Zaccheaus, when you know you have DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, and Luther Burden right now at the top of your wide receiver depth chart. And that makes Olamide, number 4 at that stage of the process. So yeah, a lot easier to move on from any wide receiver in that role. But then you add on just like, yeah, the value wasn't quite there. Or not the value, because the price was fine, but like the impact wasn't quite there. It just wasn't the kind of play-making ability that you were looking for, and it just kind of ended up being, but certainly you could do a lot worse, but you can also do a bit better. And we saw that over the course of the season as Zaccheaus' role shrunk in this offense. So like, hey, appreciate your time this past season. It was worth a shot and worked out well enough, but ready to go in maybe a different direction there for veteran receiver depth there. I mean, it could end up just being, you promote someone like Ja'Day Walker to that number 4 spot on the wide receiver depth chart and just have it be Odunze, Moore, Burden, Walker. And then, if you bring back Devin Duvernay as a kick returner, or you can draft a young receiver in the late rounds to be your number 5 or number 6 in there. Like, you're sitting pretty good at receiver, and it's not going to hurt you too much if you just let Zaccheaus walk and don't make a ton of effort to, replace him with some sort of equal experience veteran in there. You're sitting pretty at wide receiver right now. Another guy in this same conversation, like signed him in the offseason, gave it a year, and it wasn't horrible by any means, but just, not really jazzed about trying to bring him back and see if you get anything different the next time. It's tight end Durham Smythe. He was signed fairly early in the process before they drafted Colston Loveland. We thought, is this guy going to be the number 2 receiver? He was kind of a cast-off after a long career in Miami. I believe he had worked with Ben Johnson on the Miami Dolphins. That's how long he had been in Miami. Is Ben Johnson left Miami, had his whole career in Detroit, and then came to Chicago before Durham Smythe left Miami. But even in Miami, and I think it continued in Chicago, we saw doesn't really offer you much of anything as far as a receiver. He'll catch it, not going to drop it, but that's about it. He's and not a particularly dominant blocker. They used him primarily as a blocker, and he was okay there. He was fine there. I'm not going to sit here and say he was some terrible blocker, but I also don't think he was mixing up. You're mixing him up for an offensive lineman out there. There's a real difference. And again, they signed him for a 1-year deal worth, I think they paid him $2.5 million this past season. Sure, you're not sitting here going, oh, what a waste of money, what a ripoff. The Bears didn't get anything out of that tight end or whatever. No, but if I'm looking for tight end depth, I'm going in a different direction. And it's, again, kind of almost, irrespective of whether they trade Cole Kmet and irrespective of the emergence of Colston Loveland. If you trade Cole Kmet and you just got Loveland in there, you're going to need another tight end brought in. I still am not totally convinced that's a move they're going to make, but nonetheless, you'd like to replace him with some kind of number 3 tight end. We know how much Ben Johnson uses 3 tight ends. You want somebody in there who can block and can be a reliable weapon. I saw enough from Durham Smythe this season to say he's just not moving the needle. Sure, if it's another 1-year super cheap contract, it's not the end of the world. It's not going to ruin anything, but I'm ready for something else at that role, especially given, we saw him on the field a decent amount, and if you could get even a little bit more out of that role, I think it could go a long way in this Bears offense. Another spot that the Bears need to get more out of than the guy they had this past season, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka was who the Bears traded for at the deadline to try and get a little bit more defensive end depth. Traded for him from the Cleveland Browns. He was originally a first-round pick by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers back in 2021. Never really quite panned out, but was a 4 or 5 sack guy each year in Tampa early on. Then obviously the role shrinks, and then he's not getting nearly as much playing time and not getting as many sacks, but he really offered very, very little this past season. I totally understood the logic of, hey, give up a super late draft pick and just see if you can get something out of him because he has produced in the past and you were desperate at defensive end, but over the course of the season for the Bears, he finished the year with 1 quarterback hit and 4 quarterback hurries in 7 games. And that includes, he didn't play at all in either of the 2 playoff games. I think he got hurt. He might have got hurt towards the end there. But nonetheless, he rushed the passer 58 times, got you 5 pressures on those 58 plays, and he wasn't pretty run-of-the-mill in the running game. Wasn't bad in the running game. It wasn't great either. Take a flyer on a guy. You needed some depth for what it was a 6th-round pick for a 7th-round pick swap kind of thing. I get the move again. I don't think it was some bad trade by Ryan Poles, but I think we saw enough in a half a season of Joe Tryon to say, thanks for filling in when they needed you in a pinch, but need to go bigger and better at the defensive end position, despite trading for him in the middle of the season, ready to move on and go somewhere else. And the last one is someone I think we've complained about plenty on this podcast, so I don't need to spend a lot of time doing it. But cornerback Nick McLeod was signed this offseason about the same time or that Nahshon Wright was signed, and it was okay, yeah, this guy's been a backup at some other places. I think he had started some games here and there early in his career for the San Francisco 49ers, if I remember correctly. Or no, the New York Giants. He was on the Niners last year, started some games for the Giants in there, and bounced around a little bit. There was reason to think, hey, Nick McLeod could be a backup that at least has a little bit of experience in there. Okay, and for the super cheap contract they signed him on, wasn't going to be a make or break type of signing. If anything, he was a guy you were thinking maybe wouldn't have to play all that much, but he was just over a veteran minimum 1 year, $1.2 million contract. Ended up playing quite a bit more than you would have liked. Started 4 games for the Bears this past season, played in 15, was on the field a lot, and was pretty clearly their worst cornerback in terms of guys who were actually on the field at all this season. He was really, I can't say disappointing because I don't think we had any really high expectations for him, but man, no thanks. Like there's just, even at a veteran minimum contract, I don't really want him anywhere near the field on defense. I mean, I suppose he could play special teams or whatever, but like I watched Nick McLeod get beaten over and over and over again in coverage. I'm done with that. I don't need to see that again. It was worth, hey, bring him in on a cheap 1-year deal, has some experience, could be some veteran depth, and Lord knows you needed him, but he didn't give you a ton to want to bring him back there. So that's where I'm like, yeah, okay, one and done. I'm ready to move on from Nick McLeod. There's also a handful of upcoming Bears free agents that have been here for a little longer than that we've seen 2 or 3 or 4 seasons and said, oh, you know what? There's something there, but by this point, 2026, maybe it's time for a change of scenery for them and some new blood for the Bears to come in and replace them. So we'll take a look at a couple of guys that have been here for a little while, certainly predate Ben Johnson, that maybe it's time to let them walk too and see if they can move on to greener pastures. That's next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Have you ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person in the arena? Well, FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into a reality with their new NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. FanDuel is going to give you a profit boost that you can use on any NBA futures bet. And if you use that profit boost on a futures bet, you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for 2. That's right. Flights, tickets, the whole experience. So if you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock it in. I love futures this time of year, whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title. It just adds that extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now, not only can your pick cash, but it can also send you to the NBA Finals. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Might be time for the Chicago Bears to say goodbye to a handful of players who have been here a few seasons, and you've seen plenty to like over the years, but by now, I think it's kind of run its course, and you're ready to get new players in there, whether it's, just moving guys up the depth chart from below them or signing out their veterans or drafting players at their positions. I just think it's maybe some time for some turnover here, and I think of no better example of this than the nose tackle Andrew Billings, someone who I guess I was going to say was a fan favorite, is a fan favorite. I think he kind of lost some of that fan favorite status this past season. But like last year and the year before that, his first 2 seasons in Chicago, like fun, big, aggressive nose tackle is easy to root for. The big ugly on the defensive line who's famous for doing the move call, yelling at the defensive line, trying to get offensive linemen to jump off sides and, shift the defensive line up front. Like he was absolutely a really good value signing when Ryan Poles first brought him in. And then he played well enough to get a contract extension that kept him here through 2025. And in 2025, the level of play just wasn't at nearly as good as it had been the previous couple of seasons. I've seen plenty of speculation that, maybe he was overweight or a little bit out of shape. I'm not qualified to identify that, and I guess I haven't seen anything like concrete on that. I mean, he's a 340-pound nose tackle. What is the difference between in shape and not in shape? He always looks fat. He looked fat 2 years ago when he was really good, and last year when he was good before he got hurt. Like, he always looks fat. So how can I tell if he's extra overweight or slow or slobby or whatever? Like, people look on tape and feel like maybe there was some, I don't know, effort or just speed questions of just not looking quite as nimble or athletic. I'm certainly willing to leave open the possibility that he's dealing with injuries throughout that process. It's not really as important for us to talk about exactly why things maybe weren't as good this season for Andrew Billings as years past. But nonetheless, this defensive line needs to get better across the board, and it's a position they need to hit hard in free agency. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to be mad if they re-sign Andrew Billings. I like Andrew Billings. Don't get me wrong, I really do. I wouldn't be upset if they re-signed him, but it just feels like now that he's age 30, about to turn 31 here in just a couple weeks, it looks like, he's starting to be a little past his prime. Like, his best football is probably behind him. Like, he can still be a valuable rotational nose tackle for somebody for sure. And maybe that somebody could be the Chicago Bears, but I think Chicago's going to want to go out and use an early draft pick on a defensive tackle and maybe sign a defensive tackle in free agency. And part of that attrition on the defensive line says, well, you know what? Andrew Billings may have to go. Like, you still got Grady Jarrett and Javon Dexter. You got Shamar Turner coming back, and coming off an injury, of course. Then if you're going to sign and draft another defensive tackle, that would give you 5 before you even talk about Andrew Billings. Or another guy on my list here, Chris Williams, the other defensive tackle, who has been here for a couple seasons now, that they traded for from the Cleveland Browns. I think it was like right at the beginning of the 2024 season. Plenty of upside for him as a young guy who had shown some flashes as a pass rusher, had 3 sacks in 2024 for the Bears as well. Like, there was really something to like about Chris Williams, and some reason to believe that, yeah, they traded, I think, a 6th-round pick in exchange for him and a 7th-round pick, like traded very close to nothing to get a young defensive tackle with some upside that flashed at times, but now we've seen it for a couple seasons. And not to say that he's locked in and this just is what he is at his career point, but similar conversations as Billings, right? Where it's just like, well, I'd love, sure, I'd like to keep him around, but like, I need to make defensive tackle upgrades. And there's just not going to be, certainly there's not going to be playing time for him, and probably not going to be a roster spot for him if you upgrade the defensive line the way the Bears need to this offseason. He just would end up as the odd man out. So there's not really a ton of point then in re-signing him. Like, these guys aren't going to be expensive. Like, sure, if you want to re-sign him, go for it. It just doesn't feel like it's super worthwhile or worth the time or meaningful for the Bears to do so. I think the one on this list that is the hardest argument for me, that's more of a coin toss, is the free agent backup offensive lineman Ryan Bates, someone that Ryan Poles traded a 5th-round pick for from the Buffalo Bills a couple of off seasons ago to give you someone who, at least initially, you thought could compete to start at center. Never really did, but filled in at times at guard, but was going to be versatile veteran backup who can play guard or center, had started a full season for the Bills in 2022, had been a spot starter around that. You felt like, okay, veteran depth with some experience and some amount of reliability. Sure, maybe a 5th-round pick was a little more than you'd like to spend there, but he wasn't crazy expensive, and you can survive that. And I sort of put this one up in the air because we hardly saw Ryan Bates play. I don't really know if Ryan Bates is any good or not, or whether he was any good or not for the Bears. Like, I remember one of the games he started last year did not go particularly well, but I can't just say, okay, he had one bad game that means he's terrible, get this guy out of here. But now that he's a free agent, I haven't seen any reason to think, wow, this is a guy you got to make sure you bring back, especially because when the Bears have had injuries at guard, and I don't think they've really had center injuries, but like, they've never been eager to put him in the game, right? Like, we saw a 6th-round rookie, Luke Newman, get in the game at guard over Ryan Bates. Like, he was the backup center, but he did not play a single offensive snap this past season. And then when the left tackle gets hurt and they move Joe Tooney out to left guard, they don't put Ryan Bates in at left guard. They put Jordan McFadden in. Like, they even though he has played and started games at guard before, they haven't made Bates the priority to start at guard. So that signals to me that, like, sure, they like him as a backup center, and you could re-sign him, and if he's cheap, you could do worse as a backup center, but it just kind of feels like, okay, you've had him here for a couple of years, you've seen what he can do, and maybe we've seen enough because they haven't really given him a lot of opportunities to show what he can do there. Like, yeah, it kind of sucked. You gave up a 5th-round pick and really didn't get much of anything for it, except, I don't know, maybe a tiny bit of peace of mind that you had a competent backup center, and if you let him walk, you're going to need a new backup center. I mean, you don't have anybody on the roster besides Drew Dahlman and Ryan Bates that have played center before and snapped the ball in NFL games. So if you let Ryan Bates go, you got to replace him, but I'm feeling willing to do so. Again, like, not make or break. If you re-sign him, okay, you'll be fine, whatever, but like, it just feels like it's kind of time for him. Same thing at running back with Travis Homer. He's the last guy I threw on this list. I'm fine with bringing back Travis Homer if you really want to be, just for his special teams ability, but he missed like 3 or 4 or 5 special teams tackles this past season. Like, he does play a lot of special teams and has value there for sure, but like, it's not like he's this perfect special teams ace stud who does everything super, super well. Like, I'm not just trying to say he's a bad special teams player, but he's not perfect. And if he's not perfect on special teams, and I certainly don't want him touching the ball on offense ever, then like, I just would rather go in a different direction in my running back depth. Like, if you're going to move on from Roschon Johnson and move on from Travis Homer and bring in a new number 3 that just gives you some kind of more upside than what Travis Homer or Roschon Johnson give you at this point, like, I would be fully on board with that. We've seen Travis Homer here for a number of seasons now. If Your special teams coordinator, Richard Hightower, really likes him. Fine, bring him back, I guess. But like, I'm kind of ready for something a little different there. Even if it's another 7th-round pick or an undrafted free agent, just somebody that you feel like we know what Travis Homer is and isn't at this stage of his career. Bring me somebody who we don't know what he is just yet. Bring him in and figure out maybe he could be something better than Travis Homer, or he's not going to be that much worse, than Travis. He just, the upside's not there. So I'm fine with making a decision to move on there. But those are the main 10 guys I think I'd be most eager to get rid of. There's a few guys that are free agents that I'm kind of, what's the word? Like not ambiguous, but indifferent about bringing back. Like safety Jonathan Owens is someone we haven't talked about on yesterday or today's Locked On Bears podcast, talking about these Bears free agents. Like, I don't know. I don't have strong feelings or strong takes either way. Or like the long snapper Scott Daly. I mean, I don't know. Bring him back or don't. It's not going to move the needle. Cornerback Jalen Jones. I don't know. Bring him back or don't. Like some of these guys kind of fall in that gray area, but one to really focus on the ones I really don't mind letting walk and the ones I'd really like to prioritize re-signing. That's what the last couple of days of the podcast have been. Now that we've kind of established the Bears' own free agents, we're going to go a little bit closer in on what the Bears' biggest needs are going to be on both sides of the ball. Not just the biggest needs, but some of the little ones hidden in there too, across the roster, what the Bears need to accomplish this offseason. So that's going to be coming up the rest of the week here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't forget to check out the Everydayers Club for an ad-free audio feed of Locked On Bears. The website is lockedonbears.supercast.com. You can find that link in the show note descriptions wherever you tune into Locked On Bears. Just make sure you come on back tomorrow for another opportunity to bear down.